I'm Carl Vine, and this talk is called Composing with Joy. I've been writing music for 56 years, 46 years professionally. Today I'll outline some of that experience and give a slight glimpse at my creative philosophy. I have a large catalogue covering many different genres, but I'm probably best known for music with strong neo-romantic leanings like this from my first piano concerto. I also have much more diverse approaches like this from my third string quartet. To put it all in perspective, I offer this summary of my life's work in 2 pages. So I'm not sure where you're seeing this and how much of this you can read. Don't worry, I'm not going to run through every work. And this is not every work I wrote. You'll see the first ones here on the list, 1973, 1974. These were student works when I was studying at the University of Western Australia. I had been writing for about 9 years before that, but those works do not deserve the light of day. They are safely hidden away somewhere. The early works are a very mixed bag, starting with quite a lot of theatre work for ballet. Just to pick out a few specific works along the way, my first symphony here in 1986, followed fairly swiftly by the second symphony and the third in 88 and 90. 1990 was also a big year. My first piano sonata was released, and I'll be talking more about that later. Coming up to the mid-90s, my 5th and 6th symphonies, just a year apart, and my first piano concerto. Moving forward then into the 90s and the beginning of this century, quite a few works, not quite so many through the 2000s, but a very big mix of works up to my 4th quartet, 3rd piano sonata. Let me see, there's an 8th symphony somewhere there, should be 6th symphony in 2017 and the 8th symphony in 2018. So that's just a very quick overview of the entire catalogue, though of course this doesn't include everything. It excludes arrangements and music that I've later withdrawn, and in one case the music for a film that never got a commercial release. So over that 48 years, there are 132 compositions. If I break those into individual genres, we have 30 scores for dance, 8 of which are full-length, full evening ballet scores or dance scores. There are 8 symphonies, 13 concertos, including 1 concerto for orchestra, 17 other orchestral works, 6 string quartets, 4 piano sonatas, 6 other works or anthologies for solo piano, 21 chamber works, 11 works for voice or choir, 8 stage plays, 8 film or media collaborations. It shouldn't surprise you to hear that not all of these have been wildly successful, and a couple have even been wildly unsuccessful. So I'm not going to talk about everything, just a few that have made the most impact, especially internationally, and particularly the works for solo piano. But first, a little background. Until my mid-30s, I was a pretty good pianist and conductor, specialising in contemporary chamber music. I co-directed Flederman, a chamber group based in Sydney and Brisbane, which performed all around Australia and went on to present 3 international concert tours through the 1980s. Over 10 years, it commissioned and premiered 79 new works from composers, mostly Australian, but a few foreigners as well. It emerged that the pieces that were most satisfying to play were by composers who thoroughly understood the mechanics of every instrument intimately, and who knew how to balance them effectively against each other while challenging and rewarding each musician in turn. This experience led me to my 3 golden rules of composition. First of all, know your instruments. Second, understand ensemble balance. And finally, always consider the musicians. Note that this doesn't mean keep it as simple as possible. Write the most complex thing that you need to think of, but then make it as easy as possible to play. At the start of my career, I was a modernist, believing that artists had an obligation to create entirely original forms of music that had never been heard before, to confront, challenge, and disturb traditional audiences. Harmony and melody were derivative and insignificant, no more than pastiche and parody. Now, the problem with this ethos is that it reduces all memory and historical relevance itself to those 2 poisonous pejoratives, sentimentality and nostalgia, as if the very building blocks of Western music had suddenly, inexplicably, become toxic, while totally ignoring the fact that the human psyche is the sum of memory, personal experience and collective history, especially in music, our shared understanding of harmony and melody. So like all dogma, this extreme modernist ideology is reductive, simplistic and counterproductive, confusing ideology with empirical proof. So I set about rediscovering my own connection with harmony and melody, aiming not for popularity, but to connect in meaningful ways with the rest of society who had no interest in or need for the modernist music then being propagated by academic composers. Which brings me to the title of this talk, Composing with Joy. Lord knows that we don't do it for the money, and if composing does not bring a composer joy, more often than not, then they should find another vocation. I've been moved to tears by the music of others, and would love to offer the same depth of experience to anyone prepared to listen to my music, whatever techniques I use. I adore harmonic modulations, and a good one will make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Melodies can be jarring, exciting, or relaxing, or beautiful. The sum of all these connections embodies the almost mystical power that music exercises quite uniquely over our species. So now I'll look at a couple of my works that have had the greatest impact internationally. The first to attract significant international attention was a short piece for solo cello and pre-recorded sound called Inner World. The backing track consists entirely of sounds made by my friend Australian cellist David Pereira, and all of these sounds are assembled into an acoustic hall of mirrors, in the middle of which then will sit the live cellist, cocooned within the resonant inner world of their own instrument. So as you can see, this rather simple section of the work uses an octatonic melody above a B-flat diminished harmonic ostinato, resolving in the last bar of this excerpt to a D-flat major 9 chord. Throughout the 12-minute work, there's a big range of other techniques, but always keeping the focus on lyrical monody above intriguing sonorities that, it turns out, offer enormous excitement in a cello recital with boring old piano. So a predominant technique here is the pseudo-canon that you can see here in measure 44, where the soloist introduces this pizzicato pattern, which is then repeated in the pre-recorded electronic part. So it sounds as though the tape is following the soloist. But of course that is logistically impossible. It does, however, create a very strong illusion of an organic interaction between the soloist and the tape. British cellist Stephen Isserlis heard the work soon after its first recording and proceeded to add it to many of his recital programs around the world. He has now played it really hundreds of times on 4 continents, and we were just then listening to his recording on the BMG label. Subsequently, the British cellist Matthew Barley and the German Nicholas Altstadt have both played it many times, mostly in Europe. And of course, the very first player and dedicatee, David Pereira. Many others have played it around the world, though not with the same prominence as the first 3. And here we have a picture of Stephen Isserlis playing My Inner World to a fairly large audience in Hong Kong. But my most well-known and most recorded work is the First Piano Sonata, commissioned by Sydney Dance Company, but composed as a standalone concert work. Its success is partly due to its extreme virtuosity while still adhering to my basic principles of being easy as humanly possible, achieving which demands intimate knowledge of the mechanics of piano playing, thanks to my early career as a pianist. Its first performance in the States was by Australian pianist Michael Kieran Harvey in 1993 when he won the Ivo Pogorelic International Piano Competition. It quickly became a favourite show-off work in piano competitions throughout America and subsequently around the world, a position it still enjoys today. Its focus on sweeping lyrical melodies, open quartal and modal harmonies, and a wide range of driving rhythmic devices also contributed to its enduring popularity. Deep textural complexity is often achieved by maintaining a series of independent parallel layers in the music, which a process which is clearly demonstrated near the start of the work. The audio you will hear actually commences in measure 13, just before measure 14, but you'll see it's an exact repeat of measure 14. So I'll just go back to the start of this little excerpt and have an analytical look at how it is all put together. That should help you when we listen through one more time. You'll notice at the outset that there is this 12-beat ostinato in the left hand. And within that 12-beat ostinato, here it repeats 3 times, plus the time from the measure before, and it has built into it these little counter melodies that just seem to drift in or drift over the rest of the texture, where you have this free lyrical melody over the top, the ostinato plodding away, and then you have these little melodies. Then the ostinato has a little variation. It's still in 12 beats, but moves down to an E flat. So this counter melody here and another counter melody. And that ostinato repeats another 2 times, while the lyrical melody still floats over the top. Then there's the first metric modulation. This is where one rhythm, one rhythmic pattern gets evolved into another almost invisibly. So here you'll see these triplets here, dum, da, dee, da, dum, and the triplets here become the quavers. And so This could have been written in the previous tempo, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, and so on. But it's a change of meter, and the old tempo then gets lost. It is smoothed over in this transition because you'll also notice that the ostinato is in triplets, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 there, and it continues here with another variation of that 12-beat ostinato, now going down to the C. And still a 12-beat ostinato with the counter melodies in the melody there, in the middle rather there, and the very lyrical lead melody has now become a little more jerky, but it has become its own ostinato, grouped into 10 notes per pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then yet another change, the 12-beat ostinato becomes a 10-beat ostinato, so it's now the third variation of that. The melody, now the lead melody just comes as a 5-2 melodic pattern over the 10-beat ostinato, and the counter melody in the middle simply becomes a 5/8 syncopation over the 5/4. Now if I've lost you now, hang in there, because what is happening here is this build-up of elements. The basic pulse has actually not changed, and yet there are a lot more notes every second. And so it's this very gradual organic build by overlaying these different rhythmic patterns. The 5/2 melodic pattern then becomes a 6/8 pattern. Still in the bass we have a 10-beat ostinato, then the 10-beat ostinato is varied again, we're back to the 5/2 pattern, and then a 12/8 pattern. And so all of this leads inexorably to a much faster sense of the music and a second metric modulation. And the idea is that you are not aware of each of these changes. It keeps shifting gear, but almost invisibly. So you are just drawn along inexorably with the music. So have a listen again with this marked up version of the score, and hopefully you'll be able to see how the architecture is put together and the overall effect, this accretion of rhythmic complexity. And of course there are a lot of other techniques used throughout the 16 minutes of this work, but they all have some sort of relationship with the approach to musical construction in this particular excerpt. I must add that we've been listening to the piano playing of Australian pianist Michael Kieran Harvey, to whom this first sonata is dedicated, and this is the first commercial recording made, and I think still one of the best performances on record. The success of this piano sonata led eventually to a significant following right around the world for all of my piano music, which looks like that. So from the landmark piano sonata through a range of different genres, right down to the most recent work, Zophomorphosis, which is a four-hand concerto which is as yet unperformed, although I finished it 2 years ago. It's been stuck in a COVID netherworld, but is due for the premiere in Chicago next year at the Grant Park Festival with the Zopho piano duet from San Francisco, who commissioned it. Now, if I break that down into genres, we have on the left in blue, the four piano sonatas. In green, the occasional works and the compendia, the anthologies. So Five Bagatelles, Rash is a short occasional work, Red Blues and Landa Produce Toccatissimo. In orange are the chamber works, four of those, two works for piano four hands, a piano quintet and a trio. And in red, the four piano concertos, the first two piano concertos, a concerto called Implacable Gifts for two pianos, and a four-hand concerto, which, as I said, is to be premiered next year. And all of that together is a total of 4.5 hours. So that's doing rather well. What about the rest of the catalogue? And there are, for instance, 38 works for orchestra. Now, of those, there's only a few of those that have really made an impact internationally. And I just mentioned three of them now. My first symphony, Micro Symphony, has done rather well. This is number 6. Choral Symphony, and finally Smith's Alchemy, which is a string arrangement of my third string quartet. And they've been successful for very different reasons. I'll just look at those now. So first of all, Micro Symphony. It has one enormous benefit, which is that it's really short. And concert presenters everywhere know that audiences are quite happy for a little bit of modern music, as long as it's a very little bit. And turns out 12 minutes is a really good length to not offend anyone. Secondly, it is punchy. It has a simple but compelling dramatic structure and engaging melodies and harmonies. So it takes you on a really convincing journey over a short period of time. So here's a little example of Micro Symphony. Next, I'll look at the other end of the spectrum, my Choral Symphony. And this is a substantial work with a large symphonic choir, orchestra and grand organ. So it has a couple of appealing features. It's a choral work of great substance, enormous variety and universal themes. It in fact sets the Enuma Elish, a Babylonian hymn from a few thousand years before Christ, and then 3 Homeric hymns, the Homeric hymns to the earth, the moon and the sun, and all of these are in the original language. So it's very universal, dealing with a sort of imagined pantheon of humanity. It contains strong singable melodies and has a big sound and grand drama. And this is very appealing to certain orchestras and certain choirs. So occasionally a choir has forced it to be performed, and occasionally an orchestra has taken it on. And one of the most significant performances was this at the Voix du Monde, the International Choral Festival in Nancy in France in 2009. And it was also played in Chicago at the Grant Park Festival in 2019. So its size, scope and theme makes it very appealing. Here's a little excerpt from my Choral Symphony. And finally, in this very small collection of works that have attracted some notice internationally, is Smith's Alchemy, which, as I said, is a string orchestra arrangement of my third string quartet. Now, the third string quartet itself has had an unusual history in that it laid fallow for a very long time, for at least a decade, in fact. And it was only after that period quartets discovered how to play it, and it's now probably my most successful chamber work. Smith's Alchemy has done extremely well with string orchestras, and it's been played by many around the world, most noticeably the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and it was the idea of the director of the Australian Chamber Orchestra to make the arrangement for strings from the quartet, but also by Kremerata Baltica, that's Gidon Kremer's ensemble in Europe, and a lot of other European groups that have taken it up after Gidon made a number of performances and a recording of it some years ago. So, when the Australian Chamber Orchestra started playing it, they were giving international concert tours every year, sometimes 2 or 3 tours a year, and it stayed in their repertoire for at least a decade. It is a string technique showcase. The players enjoy it, the audience enjoys it, and I worked on it. I'm not a string player myself. I worked on it very carefully with Richard Tognetti, the director of the ACO, and it is a really good showcase for string technique. And it has great contrasts of lyrical and high energy episodes. And once again, it's a really good duration for a work written for strings alone. They don't have a massive range of timbre, and 14 minutes or so is a really good time span to fill. I'll play 2 little excerpts from the work, one from the lyrical slow section in the middle, and another from the presto finale. And I'd like to finish this talk with another example of a work that's done rather well, though it is something of an anomaly. It is my other most recorded work, and it is a strange little thing. It's a little song for soprano, flute, oboe, horn, harp and strings called Love Me Sweet. As far as I'm aware, it isn't known at all outside Australia, but within Australia it is my most performed and most recorded work. It was originally written as part of the soundtrack for a 4-hour television miniseries called The Battlers in 1993. It is the music for the climactic love scene after 4 hours of frustration, and in the storyline about 3 years of growing frustration. The film was originally edited to a light rock pop song until the producers worked out how much it was going to cost them for the rights to use that pop song. The other problem is that the story of The Battlers is set in 1930s Australia out in the bush, and a light rock pop song, frankly, was just inappropriate. So the footage was cut to this pop song, and that explains the rather odd shape of the music that I composed to match the footage. But it did save the producers rather a lot of money by me writing this music for them. And it turns out it is perfect for weddings and receptions, and also I've seen it work very well at a number of funerals. I will also say, just before the screens, it is a scene of great love. I'm not sure, at the time it would have been, I think the rating was MA, Mature Adult, or PG-15, one of those ratings. If the sight of people being affectionate with each other, it is not an R rating, but if the sight of unmarried perfection disturbs you, then look away. But at least they're not beheading each other, which still gets a PG rating most of the time. So here is Love Me Sweet with the original footage that I don't believe has ever been seen before outside Australia until today.
Love me sweet with all your heart, feeling, thinking, seeing. Love me with your lightest glance. Love me in full being. Love me with your open arms, in their frank surrender, with the vowing of your lips, with their silence tender. Love me with your open arms, in their frank surrender, with the vowing of your lips, in their silence tender. Love me sweet with all your heart, feeling, thinking,
So that was Composing with Joy. I wish we had something of a Q&A so I could answer any questions you might have. In the meantime, you'll just have to visit carlvine.com if you have any questions, and hopefully you'll find some answers there. I hope that we may meet someday. Bye for now.